I thought I knew what betrayal looked like. I thought it was dramatic, obvious, the kind of thing you see coming from miles away. I never imagined it would wear my best friend's smile while planning my wedding, or speak with my fiancé's voice while promising forever. But the most shocking part wasn't discovering their affair. It was realizing that someone had been watching, waiting, protecting me all along. Someone who loved me enough to document every lie, plan every detail of their downfall, and catch them in the most devastating trap imaginable. My name is Emma Walsh, and this is the story of how my maid of honor's betrayal led me to the love of my life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My fingers trembled as I held the coffee cup, watching the steam rise from the dark liquid, while Portland's January rain drummed against the windows of my favorite cafe on 23rd Avenue. The wedding dress consultation confirmation sat folded in my purse next to my phone, which hadn't stopped buzzing with congratulatory messages since Ryan posted our engagement announcement on social media 3 days ago. 6 months engaged, 2 months until the wedding, and I should have been floating on cloud 9. Instead, I felt like I was drowning in details and drowning in doubt. People always ask what made me fall for Ryan Morrison in the first place, and the honest answer is that he made everything seem easy. When we met at Powell's Books 2 years ago, I was browsing photography collections. He was in the business section. He had this way of making decisions that felt effortless. Where should we go for dinner? He knew a place. What movie should we watch? He had 3 options ready. When should we move in together? He'd already calculated the rent split and found the perfect apartment in Hawthorne. Ryan was the kind of man who made life feel organized, predictable, safe. Growing up as the only child of 2 Portland public school teachers, I'd learned to appreciate stability. My parents, David and Linda Walsh, had built their entire lives around routine and careful planning. Dad taught high school history at Lincoln High for 32 years, never missing a day, except when I had chickenpox in 3rd grade. Mom taught elementary school art, turning their garage into a studio where she painted landscapes of the Pacific Northwest every weekend, with the precision of someone grading papers. They loved each other with the quiet, steady devotion of people who'd never needed drama to feel alive. I inherited their cautious nature, which probably explains why I spent 4 years at Portland State studying business administration instead of photography, even though every fiber of my being wanted to chase light and capture moments through a lens. Photography felt too risky, too uncertain, too much like gambling with my future. Business administration felt responsible, practical, the kind of degree that would guarantee a steady paycheck and health insurance. After graduation, I landed a position as an administrative coordinator at Meridian Marketing Group, a mid-sized firm downtown that specialized in campaigns for local businesses. The work was exactly as beige as it sounds: scheduling meetings, managing calendars, organizing files, answering phones with the same scripted cheerfulness 8 hours a day. My coworkers were pleasant enough, particularly my supervisor Janet, who'd held the same position for 15 years and seemed genuinely content with the predictability of it all. But every lunch break, I'd walk to Pioneer Square with my camera, stealing moments to photograph street musicians, food cart vendors, the way afternoon light hit the brick buildings. I told myself it was just a hobby, nothing more than a way to decompress from the tedium of spreadsheets and conference calls. Deep down, though, those stolen photography sessions felt like the only time I was actually myself. When Ryan proposed on Christmas Eve at Laurelhurst Park, with the whole thing perfectly orchestrated down to the photographer he'd hired to capture the moment, I said yes because it felt like the logical next step. We'd been together 18 months, we split everything 50-50. We'd never had a fight that lasted more than an hour. He was stable, reliable, attractive in that clean-cut way that made my parents beam with approval. His career in commercial real estate was thriving, he had a solid relationship with his family, and he talked about our future with the same methodical planning he brought to everything else. The engagement ring was exactly what I would have chosen if he'd asked. A classic solitaire, tasteful and timeless, nothing too flashy or unconventional. When I posted the photo on Instagram, Sarah Peterson, my best friend since our sophomore year at Portland State, was the first to comment with 3 crying laughing emojis and a string of hard-eye faces. Within hours, she'd called me screaming with excitement and immediately started planning an engagement party. Sarah had always been the social coordinator of our friendship. Where I was cautious and methodical, she was spontaneous and magnetic. She had this gift for making everything feel like an event, turning a simple dinner into a celebration, transforming a regular Saturday into an adventure. Her apartment in the Pearl District looked like something from a design magazine, all exposed brick and carefully curated vintage furniture, while mine in Hawthorne looked like what it was: a practical space shared by two people who prioritized function over form. Working in marketing at a boutique firm that handled luxury brands, Sarah understood aesthetics in a way I never quite managed. She could walk into any room and immediately see how to make it better, more interesting, more Instagram-worthy. When she offered to help plan the wedding, I felt nothing but relief. The idea of choosing between 17 different shades of blush pink for napkins made my head spin, but Sarah attacked wedding planning like she was designing a campaign for a high-end client. She created spreadsheets that put my business administration training to shame, complete with color-coded timelines, vendor comparison charts, and budget breakdowns that accounted for every possible expense. She accompanied me to every dress appointment, took notes on flower arrangements, and somehow managed to negotiate better prices with caterers who seemed charmed by her enthusiasm. Having Sarah handle the aesthetic details meant I could focus on the practical elements: guest lists, RSVPs, seating charts, the organizational tasks that actually made sense to me. Ryan's family embraced the wedding planning with the same enthusiasm they brought to everything else. His parents, Michael and Barbara Morrison, had been married 35 years and still held hands during family dinners at their sprawling house in West Hills. They welcomed me into their Sunday traditions with genuine warmth, and I found myself looking forward to those weekly gatherings where conversation flowed easily around their oak dining table. The Morrison family dynamics fascinated me in ways I couldn't quite articulate. Where my parents were quiet and contained, Ryan's family was expansive and expressive. Michael had built Morrison Construction from nothing into one of Portland's most successful development companies, and he talked about business with the passion most people reserved for hobbies. Barbara had left her teaching career to raise Ryan and his older brother Jake, but she'd never lost the educator's gift for making everyone feel heard and valued. Jake Morrison remained the most enigmatic member of the family, which perhaps explained why I found myself paying attention to him in ways that probably weren't appropriate for someone engaged to his younger brother. Where Ryan was polished and predictable, Jake carried himself with a quiet intensity that suggested depths I couldn't fathom. He'd started Morrison Tech Solutions 5 years earlier, building custom software for small businesses, and unlike his father's expansive storytelling about construction projects, Jake spoke about his work with an economy of words that somehow made it sound more impressive. During those Sunday dinners, I noticed how Jake listened more than he spoke, how his questions revealed he'd been paying attention to details other people missed. When I mentioned struggling with the administrative software at Meridian Marketing, he spent 20 minutes explaining more efficient ways to organize digital files. When my mom talked about wanting to create an online portfolio for her paintings, Jake quietly wrote down the names of user-friendly website builders. But what struck me most about Jake was how he seemed to see me as a complete person, rather than just Ryan's fiancé. He asked about my photography with genuine curiosity, remembered details about projects I'd mentioned weeks earlier, and never made me feel like my artistic interests were frivolous or impractical. When I showed him photos from a weekend trip to Crater Lake, he studied them with the same attention he probably gave to lines of code, pointing out compositional elements I'd achieved instinctively but never consciously recognized. The contrast between the brothers became more apparent as wedding planning intensified. Ryan approached our marriage like a business merger, focused on practical considerations like combined finances, shared living space, and long-term planning. He talked about our future with the confidence of someone reading from a manual. Buy a house in 2 years, start having kids in 3, build college funds and retirement accounts with methodical precision. Jake, on the other hand, asked different questions entirely. During a family barbecue in late November, while Ryan and his father discussed real estate market projections, Jake sat beside me on the back deck and asked what I wanted to photograph that I'd never had the chance to capture. The question caught me off guard because nobody had ever asked me about unfulfilled artistic ambitions. I found myself telling him about wanting to document the Pacific Northwest in different seasons, about dreaming of capturing the aurora borealis somewhere far from city lights, about wondering what it would feel like to photograph a place where nobody spoke English and everything was completely foreign. Jake listened without trying to offer solutions or make suggestions, just absorbed what I was saying like it mattered. Later that evening, as Ryan and I drove back to our apartment, he mentioned that Jake had seemed unusually talkative during the barbecue. When I told him we'd been discussing photography, Ryan nodded absently and changed the subject to honeymoon logistics. The contrast struck me as significant in ways I wasn't ready to examine too closely. November blended into December with the relentless momentum of wedding planning. Sarah had transformed into a project manager, coordinating vendor meetings with military precision, while somehow making every appointment feel like a celebration. She accompanied me to cake tastings where we sampled dozens of flavors, to florist consultations where we debated the symbolic meaning of different flower combinations, to venue walkthroughs where she took detailed photos and measurements. The venue we finally selected, Oaks Pioneer Church in Selwood, felt like the perfect compromise between my desire for something intimate and Ryan's preference for traditional elegance. The historic building could accommodate our guest list of 120 people, and the adjacent reception hall offered views of the Willamette River that would look stunning in photographs. Sarah immediately began creating mood boards that incorporated the venue's rustic charm with sophisticated details that would photograph beautifully for social media. Throughout December, I found myself studying Sarah with new attention, trying to understand the source of her boundless enthusiasm for my wedding. She'd always been supportive of my relationship with Ryan, but her investment in our marriage seemed to go beyond normal best friend excitement. She knew details about our relationship that I couldn't remember sharing, remembered anniversary dates and relationship milestones with the precision of someone keeping detailed records. When I mentioned this observation to Ryan, he laughed and suggested that Sarah was probably just excited to be maid of honor at what she clearly considered the social event of the season. His explanation made logical sense, but something about Sarah's intensity felt disproportionate to the occasion. The engagement party Sarah organized for New Year's Eve became the perfect example of her event planning skills and her mysterious overinvestment in our relationship. She rented the rooftop space at the Nines Hotel downtown, arranged catering that featured all of Ryan's favorite foods, and created a playlist that somehow included songs meaningful to our relationship that I'd never explicitly told her about. The party itself was flawless. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah had invited exactly the right mix of people, close friends, family members, a few coworkers, and orchestrated everything with the skill of a professional event planner. She gave a toast that brought tears to Barbara Morrison's eyes, praising Ryan and me as the couple she'd always known were meant to be together. She presented us with a photo album documenting our relationship from the beginning, complete with pictures I didn't remember her taking. But throughout the evening, I noticed Jake watching Sarah with an expression I couldn't interpret. He was polite when she spoke to him, participated in conversations when she drew him into group discussions, but something about his demeanor suggested he was analyzing rather than enjoying her performance. When I asked him later if everything was okay, Jake paused for a long moment before responding that Sarah seemed very invested in making sure everyone had a good time. His tone carried an undertone I couldn't identify, and when I pressed him to elaborate, he simply said that some people's enthusiasm felt genuine while others felt calculated. The comment bothered me more than it should have, probably because it echoed doubts I'd been trying to suppress about Sarah's recent behavior. Her investment in my wedding planning had reached levels that felt almost possessive, as if she was planning her own celebration rather than supporting mine. She had opinions about every detail, from the specific shade of lipstick I should wear to the exact wording of our vows. More troubling was how she'd begun inserting herself into interactions between Ryan and me with increasing frequency. She'd text during our date nights to check on wedding details that could easily wait until the next day. She'd call with urgent questions about reception music while we were having dinner together. She'd show up at our apartment, unannounced, with wedding magazines and vendor brochures, staying for hours to discuss options that didn't require immediate decisions. Ryan seemed unperturbed by Sarah's constant presence in our wedding planning, but I began to feel like she was orchestrating our relationship as much as our ceremony. When I suggested we needed some time to make decisions without outside input, Sarah looked genuinely hurt and asked if I was unhappy with her help. The guilt I felt for questioning her motives only intensified my confusion about the situation. Sarah had been my closest friend for 4 years, the person who'd supported me through my parents' health scares, my career uncertainties, my relationship anxieties. She'd celebrated every milestone in my life with genuine joy and had never given me reason to doubt her loyalty. But as January approached and our wedding date drew closer, I found myself paying closer attention to details that had previously escaped my notice. The way Sarah's face lit up when Ryan entered a room, how she remembered his coffee preferences and work schedule with unusual precision, how she managed to steer conversations toward topics that highlighted his interests and accomplishments. During a dress fitting in early January, while I stood on the platform surrounded by mirrors, Sarah took dozens of photos from every angle, ostensibly for social media and memory-keeping purposes. But watching her capture images of me in my wedding dress, I noticed how carefully she framed each shot, how she seemed to be documenting every detail of the gown and accessories. When I asked why she needed so many photos, Sarah laughed and said she wanted to make sure we captured every moment of this special time. Her explanation sounded reasonable, but something about her expression while she photographed me in my wedding dress felt strange, almost possessive. That evening, I found myself scrolling through Sarah's Instagram account, studying her posts from the past few months with new attention. Hidden among her usual lifestyle content, coffee shop visits, work events, weekend activities, were dozens of photos featuring Ryan and me, but with Ryan prominently featured in ways I hadn't previously noticed. There were pictures from group dinners where she'd managed to position herself next to Ryan, photos from holiday gatherings where she and Ryan appeared deep in conversation, candid shots from various events where her attention seemed focused on him rather than the actual occasion. The pattern became impossible to ignore once I started looking for it. Sarah had been documenting her interactions with Ryan with the same methodical attention she brought to wedding planning, creating a visual record of their relationship that existed parallel to but separate from her friendship with me. Lying in bed that night, listening to Ryan sleep beside me, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining problems where none existed. Sarah was naturally social and photographically inclined, so of course she'd taken lots of pictures during our engagement period. Ryan was charming and charismatic, so naturally people enjoyed talking to him at social gatherings. But the doubt, once planted, began growing with the persistence of something that knew it was justified. Over the following days, I found myself observing Sarah and Ryan's interactions with the uncomfortable attention of someone conducting surveillance on their own life. What I discovered made my stomach turn with recognition and disbelief. They had inside jokes I didn't understand. They referenced conversations I hadn't been part of. They communicated with glances and smiles that suggested a level of intimacy I'd somehow missed completely. The realization that my best friend and my fiancé had developed a relationship that excluded me felt like discovering that the ground beneath my feet had been shifting all along, and I'd been too trusting to notice I was standing on quicksand. The first week of January brought an unusual warmth to Portland. The kind of false spring that makes you forget winter still has months left to punish the Pacific Northwest. I was walking back from lunch at Pioneer Square when I noticed Jake Morrison standing outside the Meridian Marketing Building, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets, looking like he was debating whether to come inside. Jake had never visited me at work before. In the 2 years I'd known him, our interactions had been limited to family gatherings and the occasional group outing. Seeing him on the sidewalk outside my office building felt surreal, like discovering a character from one part of your life had wandered into another without permission. He spotted me before I could decide whether to approach him or pretend I hadn't seen him. His face lit up with what looked like relief, and he raised his hand in a tentative wave. "Emma, hey, I was hoping I might catch you." "Jake, what are you doing here?" I tried to keep my tone light, but something about his presence felt charged with significance I couldn't identify. I was in the neighborhood for a client meeting, and I thought maybe we could grab coffee. If you have time, I mean. I know you're busy with work and wedding stuff. The suggestion caught me off guard. Jake and I had never spent time alone together, never had a conversation that wasn't part of a larger family gathering, but something in his expression suggested this wasn't a casual impulse. Sure, I have about 40 minutes left on my lunch break. There's a good place around the corner. We walked to Stumptown Coffee on 3rd Avenue, making small talk about the unusually mild weather and the construction project that had been blocking traffic downtown for months. But I could feel tension radiating from Jake like heat from a furnace, and by the time we settled into a corner table with our drinks, I was practically vibrating with curiosity. So what's really going on? I asked, wrapping my hands around my ceramic mug for warmth. You didn't drive downtown just to grab coffee with your future sister-in-law. Jake stared into his espresso for a long moment, and when he looked up, his expression was more serious than I'd ever seen it. Emma, can I ask you something, and will you promise to give me an honest answer? The request sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the January air. That depends on the question. How well do you really know Sarah? The question hung between us like a loaded weapon. I felt my defenses rise immediately, the way they always did, when someone questioned my judgment about people I cared about. Sarah's been my best friend for 4 years. I know her very well. Why are you asking? Jake nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that response. 4 years is a long time. But people can surprise you, even people you think you know completely. Jake, what are you trying to say? Instead of answering directly, he pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph. It took me a moment to recognize the location, the rooftop at the Nines Hotel, where Sarah had thrown our engagement party. But this wasn't one of the official party photos. This picture had been taken from across the space, capturing Sarah and Ryan in what appeared to be an intense conversation near the bar. Their body language looked intimate in a way that made my stomach clench. Where did you get this? I took it. During your engagement party. I studied the image more carefully, trying to convince myself that I was misinterpreting what I was seeing. But the way Sarah was leaning toward Ryan, the way her hand rested on his arm, the way they were positioned to exclude everyone else from their conversation, it all suggested a level of intimacy that felt wrong. This could be completely innocent, I said, but my voice sounded uncertain even to me. It could be, Jake agreed. But Emma, this wasn't the only time I noticed them having private conversations that seemed to exclude you. He swiped to another photo, this one from Thanksgiving dinner at the Morrison family house. Again, Sarah and Ryan were positioned slightly apart from the group, engaged in what looked like a serious discussion. Sarah's expression was more animated than I remembered from that evening, and Ryan was giving her his complete attention in a way that made me uncomfortable. You've been taking pictures of them? Not intentionally. I take a lot of photos at family events. Mom always asks someone to document everything. But when I was going through them later, I started noticing patterns. Jake showed me 3 more photos from different occasions over the past 2 months. In each one, Sarah and Ryan appeared to be having private moments that I either hadn't witnessed or hadn't recognized as significant when they happened. Jake, this feels like surveillance. I know how it looks. But Emma, I'm worried about you. The sincerity in his voice made me look up from the phone screen to meet his eyes. What I saw there wasn't the calculated concern of someone trying to manipulate me, but genuine fear for my well-being. Why are you worried about me? Because I think Sarah might not be the friend you believe she is, and I think Ryan might not be the man you deserve. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I set down my coffee cup with more force than necessary, the ceramic clinking against the table. That's a serious thing to say about 2 people you've known for years. I know. And if I'm wrong, I'll apologize to both of them and to you. But Emma, what if I'm right? I stared at him across the small table, trying to process what he was suggesting. The idea that Sarah and Ryan might be having an affair seemed impossible. The kind of betrayal that happened to other people but never to someone like me. I was careful, cautious, good at reading people and situations. Surely I would have noticed if my best friend and my fiancé were deceiving me. But even as I tried to dismiss Jake's suspicions, memories began surfacing that took on new significance in light of his photographs. Sarah's detailed knowledge of Ryan's schedule. Her insistence on planning wedding events that gave her frequent access to both of us. The way she'd been documenting every aspect of our relationship with unusual thoroughness. What exactly are you suggesting I do with this information? I'm suggesting you pay attention. Watch them when they don't think you're watching. Ask questions they're not expecting. Trust your instincts. Jake reached across the table and touched my hand briefly, the contact sending an unexpected jolt of electricity up my arm. Emma, you're one of the smartest, most observant people I know. If something feels off to you, it probably is. The compliment caught me off guard. I'd never thought of myself as particularly perceptive, especially compared to someone like Jake who seemed to notice everything while saying very little. Why are you telling me this? Why not talk to Ryan directly? Because Ryan's my brother, and I love him, but that doesn't make him a good person. And because you deserve better than being lied to by people who claim to care about you. I looked at Jake's face, really looked at it, and saw something I'd never noticed before. Beneath his usual reserved expression was an intensity that suggested deep feeling carefully controlled. The way he was looking at me wasn't just concerned or protective, it was personal. Jake, is there something else you're not telling me? He was quiet for so long that I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Emma, if I told you that I've been watching Ryan and Sarah because I care about what happens to you, would that complicate things? What do you mean, you care about what happens to me? I mean that I've spent 2 years watching my brother take for granted something I would give anything to have. The confession hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. Jake was telling me that he had feelings for me, feelings that preceded his suspicions about Ryan and Sarah, which meant his warnings might be motivated by personal interest rather than genuine concern for my well-being. Jake, I'm engaged to your brother. I know. And if he were making you happy, if he were treating you the way you deserve to be treated, I would never say anything. But Emma, when was the last time Ryan asked about your photography? When was the last time he seemed genuinely interested in what you were thinking or feeling? The questions stung because they highlighted problems I'd been trying to ignore. Ryan's practical approach to our relationship often felt more like a business partnership than a romance. He was reliable and stable, but he rarely demonstrated curiosity about my inner life or artistic ambitions. That doesn't mean he's having an affair. No, it doesn't. But it means you deserve someone who sees you clearly and values what they see. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message, and he glanced at it with a frown. I have to get back to work, but Emma, will you think about what I've said? I don't know what to think about any of this. Then start small. Tonight, when you're with Ryan, pay attention to how he talks about Sarah. Listen to whether he mentions conversations or interactions with her that he hasn't told you about. Jake stood up and put on his jacket, but paused before leaving. And, Emma? If you ever need someone to talk to about any of this, someone who isn't involved in the situation, you have my number. After he left, I sat in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes, staring at my reflection in the window and trying to process everything he'd told me. The photographs could have innocent explanations, but they definitely documented behavior I hadn't noticed or had chosen to overlook. More troubling was the realization that Jake had been watching my relationship with the attention of someone who cared about the outcome. I walked back to the office in a daze, mechanically completing my afternoon tasks while my mind churned through months of memories, looking for clues I might have missed. By the time I got home to the apartment Ryan and I shared in Hawthorne, I felt like I was seeing everything through different eyes. Ryan was already home, which was unusual for a Tuesday. He typically worked late at the real estate office, showing properties to clients or handling paperwork until 7 or 8 in the evening. Finding him in the kitchen at 5:30, cooking dinner with obvious care, immediately struck me as significant. "You're home early," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I wrapped up my appointments sooner than expected, so I thought I'd surprise you with dinner." He was making chicken marsala, a dish that required more time and attention than his usual weeknight meals of takeout or simple pasta. As I watched him work, I noticed he was cooking enough for 3 people. "Are we expecting company?" Sarah mentioned she might stop by to go over some final wedding details. I figured if she's coming over during dinner time, we should feed her. The casual way he mentioned Sarah's visit, as if it had been planned for days rather than something that might happen, immediately raised my suspicions. I pulled out my phone to check if Sarah had texted me about coming over, but found no messages from her. When did Sarah say she might stop by? She called me this afternoon, something about finalizing the music playlist for the reception. She called you? Why didn't she call me? Ryan paused in his stirring, and I caught a flicker of something across his face. Annoyance, maybe, or calculation. She said she tried calling you but couldn't get through. Something about your phone going straight to voicemail. I checked my call log and found no missed calls from Sarah. My phone had been working perfectly all day, and I'd been answering messages and emails without any technical problems. My phone's been working fine all day. Maybe it was a network issue. You know how spotty coverage can be downtown. The explanation was plausible, but something about Ryan's delivery felt rehearsed. I watched him continue cooking, noticing details I'd previously overlooked. He was using Sarah's favorite spices, the ones she'd mentioned loving during a dinner party at our apartment last month. He'd opened a bottle of the specific wine she'd complimented during our engagement party. When Sarah arrived 45 minutes later, she was carrying a leather portfolio that looked suspiciously empty and wearing a dress that seemed too formal for a casual dinner with friends. She greeted me with her usual enthusiasm, but I noticed how her eyes immediately sought out Ryan, how her smile brightened when she saw him. "Emma, you look tired. Are you getting enough sleep?" The comment felt like criticism disguised as concern, especially since I'd spent extra time on my appearance that morning specifically because I was meeting Jake for coffee. "I'm fine, just busy with work. You should take better care of yourself. Wedding planning is stressful enough without exhausting yourself with other commitments." Sarah's advice felt patronizing, as if she were speaking to a child who needed guidance rather than an adult capable of managing her own life. But what bothered me more was how Ryan nodded in agreement, as if they'd previously discussed my supposed exhaustion. During dinner, I paid careful attention to Sarah and Ryan's interactions, looking for the signs Jake had suggested I watch for. What I discovered made my appetite disappear completely. They had a rhythm of conversation that excluded me, finishing each other's sentences and referencing shared experiences I didn't remember them having together. When Sarah mentioned a restaurant in Northwest Portland that sounded interesting, Ryan immediately knew which one she meant and offered detailed opinions about their menu. When Ryan talked about a difficult client situation, Sarah demonstrated knowledge of his work challenges that seemed more detailed than what I typically shared with my friends about my job. Most unsettling was how they seemed to communicate through glances and subtle expressions, conducting a parallel conversation that I couldn't access. When Sarah complimented the chicken marsala, Ryan's face lit up with pride that seemed disproportionate to the achievement of successfully following a recipe. "This is delicious, Ryan. You really outdid yourself." "I'm just glad you like it. I was worried the sauce might be too rich." "It's perfect. You always know exactly what I like." The exchange felt intimate in a way that made me physically uncomfortable. The way Sarah said, "You always know exactly what I like," suggested a level of attention and care that went beyond friendly consideration. After dinner, Sarah spread the contents of her portfolio across our dining table, printouts of reception music organized by category, with handwritten notes about tempo and mood. But as I looked more closely at the documents, I realized they were virtually identical to the music playlist we'd finalized 2 weeks ago. "Sarah, we already decided on the reception music. I have a copy of the final playlist in my wedding binder." "I know, but I thought we should review it one more time to make sure we haven't missed anything important." "What could we have missed? We spent 3 hours going through every song. I just want everything to be perfect for you." Sarah's insistence on revisiting decisions we'd already made felt excessive, especially since the changes she was suggesting were minimal. But as we went through the music selections, I noticed how frequently she and Ryan exchanged looks when I wasn't paying attention, how they seemed to have private opinions about songs they'd never discussed with me. When Sarah suggested adding a specific slow song to the playlist, Ryan immediately supported her recommendation with enthusiasm that seemed out of proportion to the suggestion. "That's a great idea, Sarah. That song would be perfect for the evening portion of the reception." I thought so too. It has such a romantic feel. I looked up the song on my phone and discovered it was a relatively obscure track by an indie artist I'd never heard of. The fact that both Sarah and Ryan not only knew the song but had strong opinions about its romantic qualities suggested they'd discovered it together, possibly in a context that had nothing to do with my wedding. "How do you both know this song?" I heard it on the radio, Sarah said quickly. It reminded me of you and Ryan, so I thought it would be perfect for your wedding. I think I heard it somewhere too, Ryan added. Maybe Sarah mentioned it to me before. Their explanations felt coordinated, as if they'd prepared answers for questions they expected me to ask. The realization that they might be actively deceiving me about something as simple as song recommendations made me wonder what other lies they'd been telling. By the time Sarah left at 10:30, I felt like I'd been watching a performance designed specifically to exclude me from its true meaning. Ryan and Sarah had spent the evening conducting a relationship that existed parallel to but separate from their individual relationships with me, and they'd done it so skillfully that I might never have noticed if Jake hadn't taught me what to look for. As Ryan cleaned up the dinner dishes, I excused myself to the bathroom and called Jake from behind the locked door. Emma, is everything okay? You were right. They're lying to me about something, and I don't think it's just wedding planning. What happened? I told him about the evening, Ryan's early arrival home, Sarah's convenient visit, their knowledge of songs and restaurants they claim to have discovered independently. Jake, I think they're having an affair. I'm sorry, Emma. I really hoped I was wrong. What do I do now? Now you decide how much you want to know, and how you want to handle what you discover. I want to know everything. I want to know how long this has been going on, how deep it goes, and how stupid they think I am. Then we need a plan. And Emma, you're going to need proof that they can't explain away. Lying in bed that night next to Ryan, listening to him sleep peacefully beside me while my mind raced with suspicions and half-formed plans for uncovering the truth, I realized that my life had fundamentally changed in the space of a single day. This morning I'd been a woman planning her wedding to a man she trusted, supported by a best friend she loved. Tonight I was someone conducting surveillance on the two people closest to her, trying to determine the extent of their betrayal. The strangest part wasn't the pain of discovering their deception. It was the relief I felt at finally having an explanation for the vague unease that had been building for months. Some part of me had known something was wrong, but I dismissed my instincts as pre-wedding anxiety rather than trusting my ability to recognize when people were lying to me. Now I understood that my instincts had been correct all along. Sarah and Ryan were having an affair, and they'd been conducting it right in front of me while planning my wedding. The question wasn't whether they were betraying me. It was how extensively, for how long, and what I was going to do about it. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I found myself thinking not about Ryan or Sarah, but about Jake. The way he'd looked at me across the coffee shop table, the careful way he'd presented evidence without trying to manipulate my interpretation of it, the genuine concern in his voice when he'd warned me to trust my instincts. For 2 years I'd thought of Jake as Ryan's quiet older brother, someone pleasant but unremarkable who happened to be part of the family I was marrying into. Now I realized I'd been seeing him through Ryan's eyes rather than my own, accepting Ryan's dismissive characterization of his brother, instead of forming my own opinion. Jake had spent months documenting evidence of Ryan and Sarah's betrayal, not because he wanted to hurt his brother, but because he cared enough about me to risk family conflict in order to protect me from continued deception. The realization that someone had been quietly looking out for my well-being while I'd been completely oblivious to the threat made me feel both grateful and devastated. Tomorrow I would begin the process of uncovering the full extent of Ryan and Sarah's affair. I would document their lies, gather evidence of their betrayal, and decide how to confront them with what I discovered. But tonight, for the first time in months, I felt like I was finally seeing my life clearly instead of through the comfortable haze of willful blindness I'd been living in since Ryan proposed. The truth was going to be painful, but it was also going to set me free from a marriage built on deception and a friendship based on lies. And maybe, once I'd dealt with the wreckage of my current relationships, I could explore what it might mean to be seen and valued by someone who'd been watching over me all along. The wedding dress felt heavier than it should have when I tried it on for the final fitting. Standing in front of the mirror at Morrison's bridal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was wearing a costume for a role I wasn't sure I wanted to play. The ivory silk that had seemed perfect 3 months ago now felt like armor protecting me from a truth I wasn't ready to face. "You look beautiful," Sarah said from behind me, but her voice carried a strange tension that made me turn around. She was staring at me with an expression I couldn't read, something between sadness and hunger that sent chills down my spine. "Sarah, are you okay?" You've been acting strange all week. I'm fine, just emotional about the wedding. It's going to change everything between us. The way she said everything made my stomach clench. There was finality in her tone that felt more like goodbye than celebration. That evening, I found myself at Jake's apartment without really planning to go there. He opened the door looking surprised, but not unwelcome, stepping aside to let me in without asking questions. "Emma, what's wrong?" "I think I'm making a mistake." Jake was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with the careful attention he gave to everything important. "What kind of mistake?" "Marrying Ryan. Living the life everyone expects me to live, instead of the life I actually want." "What life do you actually want?" The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was brave enough to cross. Looking at Jake, really looking at him, I saw someone who'd been watching me carefully for years. Someone who knew me better than my own fiancé. I want to take photographs that matter. I want to travel to places that scare me. I want to fall in love with someone who sees me clearly instead of someone who loves the idea of me. Jake stepped closer, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Emma, what if I told you that someone has been seeing you clearly for a very long time?" "What do you mean?" "I mean that I've been in love with you since the day Ryan brought you home. I've watched you settle for less than you deserve, and it's been killing me." The confession hit me like lightning, illuminating everything I'd been too afraid to acknowledge. Jake had been there all along, quietly supporting me, paying attention to details Ryan never noticed, caring about dreams Ryan dismissed as impractical. "Jake, I'm supposed to marry your brother in 2 weeks. You're supposed to marry someone who makes you happy. Emma, when was the last time Ryan made you genuinely happy?" I tried to remember and couldn't find a single moment of pure joy in our relationship. Contentment, yes. Security, absolutely. But the kind of happiness that made you forget to breathe? Never. What about Sarah? She's been planning this wedding like it's her own celebration. Maybe because she wishes it were. The suggestion stopped me cold. What do you mean? I mean, Sarah's been in love with Ryan longer than you have. I think she's been waiting for him to notice her, and helping plan your wedding has been torture disguised as friendship. Everything clicked into place. Sarah's excessive involvement in wedding decisions, her detailed knowledge of Ryan's preferences, her strange reaction to seeing me in the wedding dress. She hadn't been planning my wedding. She'd been planning the wedding she wanted to have with Ryan. Jake, if I call off this wedding, everything changes. Everything's already changed, Emma. You just haven't admitted it yet. He was right. Standing in his living room, looking at someone who actually saw me, I realized I'd been sleepwalking through my own life for months. What do we do now? Now you decide whether you want to keep living someone else's life or start living your own. I kissed him then, and it felt like waking up after years of dreaming. This was what love was supposed to feel like: urgent, necessary, real. 2 weeks later, instead of walking down the aisle, I was boarding a plane to Europe with Jake, my camera, and a one-way ticket to discovering who I could become when I stopped trying to be who everyone else wanted me to be. Ryan and Sarah figured out their feelings for each other eventually. They deserved the chance to discover whether their connection was real or just built on the drama of forbidden attraction. As for me, I learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is disappoint everyone's expectations and choose happiness instead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.